What if loyalty could be bought? What if a general, not the Republic, owned the hearts of his soldiers? Before we begin, if you like what we do, please consider subscribing to us at History's Edge. It helps us keep bringing you more of these documentaries. Thank you. Welcome to Ancient Rome, Part 2 of our Roman Army trilogy, The Professional Legions. This is the story of how Rome's citizen army became a professional war machine, and how that change shook the foundations of the Republic itself. Chapter 1. Marius and the Army Reborn. By the late 2nd century BCE, Rome stood at the height of its power. Its legions had conquered much of Italy, pushed back enemies, and expanded Roman influence across distant lands. Yet beneath this success, the Republic's strength was rotting. The armies that had built Rome's greatness still relied on citizen farmers who left their fields to fight. But those fields were vanishing. Wealthy elites bought up farmland, creating vast estates. Small farmers, once the lifeblood of the legions, could no longer afford to serve. Rome's armies were shrinking, its borders trembled. The Republic faced a quiet crisis that could bring down everything it had built. Into this storm rose Gaius Marius. He was not a noble, not born into Rome's ruling class. He came from Arpinum, modern-day Arpino in Italy. Through sheer ability and iron determination, he rose through the ranks. When he became consul in 107 BCE, Marius saw the danger. The old ways of raising an army would fail. Rome's enemies would not wait. Change was the only answer. Marius opened the legions to the landless poor. Men who owned nothing but the clothes they wore were given arms by the state and trained for war. For these men, service offered a future, pay, food, and the promise of land after victory. For Rome, it offered survival. But with this change came a new force that no one could yet control. These soldiers would no longer fight for duty alone. They would fight for the general who fed and rewarded them. Marius made his army a machine. Every man carried the same gladius, the short sword for stabbing in brutal close combat. Every man hurled the pilum, a heavy spear that shattered enemy formations. Every man raised the scutum, a great rectangular shield that turned ranks of soldiers into a living wall. For the first time, the Roman soldier stood not as an individual warrior, but as a piece of something greater. Discipline hardened under Marius. Soldiers marched more than 30 kilometers, about 18 miles in a day, burdened with packs weighing over 20 kilograms, around 44 pounds. There was no mercy for weakness. Fines, extra labor, and beatings were common punishments. The most feared penalty was decimation. When a unit failed or fled, 1 man in 10 would be chosen by lot and killed by his comrades. Fear kept the lines strong. Marius rebuilt the army's structure. The old maniples, too slow for the wars ahead, gave way to the cohort. Each cohort, about 480 men, could fight alone or as part of a larger force. 10 cohorts formed a legion of nearly 5,000 soldiers, all drilled to act as one. No army in Rome's history had been so unified, so deadly, or so loyal to its commander. But as Marius's new legions marched, a question rose behind them. When soldiers no longer fought for the Republic, what would happen to the Republic itself? Marius's new legions soon faced the test of survival. In North Africa, Jugurtha, king of Numidia, modern-day Algeria, had defied Rome for years. He knew the desert and the mountains, using ambushes and swift raids to outwit Roman generals. But Marius's army was not like the old citizen forces. His soldiers marched farther, endured greater hardships, and struck with precision. Night after night, they built fortified camps. Step by step, they squeezed Jugurtha's strength. Victory came not through open battle, but through betrayal. Jugurtha was handed over, and the long war ended in Rome's favour. Yet an even greater storm gathered to the north. The Cimbrian Teutoners, peoples from lands now part of Denmark and northern Germany, swept across Gaul, modern-day France. Earlier, Roman armies had been broken, their dead scattered across fields and rivers. Rome's heartland lay open to invasion, but Marius stood ready. In 102 BCE, at Aquae Sextiae, near modern Aix-en-Provence, France, Marius laid a trap. He hid troops behind a ridge while his main force faced the Teutones. When the enemy was fully engaged, the hidden soldiers attacked from behind. The invaders were caught between two Roman blades and slaughtered. A year later, at Vercellae, near modern Vercelli in Italy, Marius and his co-commander destroyed the Cimbri. The threat to Italy was crushed. Rome rejoiced. Marius was hailed as its saviour, elected consul 7 times, a feat no one had achieved before. His veterans were rewarded with land in colonies across conquered lands, spreading Roman power deeper into new territory. But behind the triumph, a new danger took root. Soldiers fought not for the Senate, not for the people of Rome, but for the general who gave them land and gold. The bonds of loyalty shifted from the state to the man who led them. Marius's reforms had made the army unstoppable. His legions marched as builders as well as warriors. They raised roads, bridges, and fortifications. Engineers and supply officers travelled with the troops, turning legions into self-sufficient machines of conquest. On the battlefield, the legions became a wall of iron and discipline. Standard weapons and armour gave the army a unified look, a force that seemed carved from a single block of steel. And yet, within that wall, each man clung to personal tokens, charms, carvings, symbols of family and home. Marius had saved Rome, but in doing so, he changed it forever. The professional army he created would win empires, and it would set Rome on a path toward civil war, as generals rose to claim power with the legions at their backs. Chapter 2: The Soldier's Life. A professional Roman legionary lived under the weight of duty, discipline, and unending labour. From the moment he swore the sacramentum, the sacred military oath, he gave up personal freedom. His loyalty was to his general, his comrades, and the standards of Rome. The legion became his family, his identity. Training was relentless. Recruits marched over 30 kilometres, about 18 miles, in full gear, often carrying packs that weighed as much as 45 kilograms or 100 pounds. They learned to move as a single body, their shields overlapping, their weapons striking in unison. Wooden swords and spears were made double the weight of real weapons to build endurance. They trained until every movement was instinct. A day in camp began at dawn. Soldiers rose, cleaned weapons and armour, polished helmets, and checked their gear. Neglect could mean punishment, reduced rations, public flogging, or worse. Inspections were common, discipline unforgiving. A rusty sword could bring disgrace on the entire unit. Legionaries built wherever they marched. Every night a fortified camp was raised, ditches dug, palisades erected, tents arranged in strict order. Soldiers carried their own tools, spades, pickaxes, saws, because a legion fought as much with muscle and sweat as with steel. The diet was simple and monotonous. Each soldier received grain, which he ground himself to bake bread or make porridge. Water was mixed with vinegar to purify it. Meat, cheese, or olives were rare treats, often reserved for those who distinguished themselves. Every detail of the legionary's life reinforced discipline. He lived as part of a machine, where the failure of one man could doom thousands. The professional legionary was more than a warrior. His life shaped the very foundation of Rome's power. His service lasted up to 25 years, sometimes longer if war demanded it. From the moment he swore his oath, he became the property of the state. His body, his time, and his loyalty all belonged to Rome. Each day began at dawn with the sound of the buccina, the military horn. The first task was to inspect and clean equipment. Armour was polished until it gleamed. Swords were sharpened. Shields were checked for cracks. A man's gear was his lifeline. To neglect it was to endanger his comrades. The daily routine included drills with weapons, shield formations, and practice marches. But life was not only about battle readiness. Soldiers became engineers and labourers. They built camps with precise layouts, always the same design, whether in Gaul, modern-day France, or Judea, modern-day Israel. Camps had streets, granaries, workshops, and wells. They were small cities, raised and dismantled as the army moved. Roman soldiers were responsible for vast construction projects that still shape the world today. They laid stone roads that ran straight across valleys and hills, sometimes stretching hundreds of kilometres. They raised bridges of stone and timber, drained swamps to create farmland, and built fortresses on frontier lines. In Britain, they helped build Hadrian's Wall. In Germany, They planted the first seeds of towns that still stand. Their labor extended beyond the empire's borders. When Rome conquered, the legions followed, building temples, forums, and baths. The empire expanded not only through battle, but through these marks of civilization. The legion was both sword and trowel. Religion filled the soldiers' world. Every camp had altars and sacred spaces. Soldiers sacrificed to Mars before battle, prayed to Jupiter for victory, and left offerings to Fortuna, the goddess of luck. Many carried amulets sewn into their tunics, small bones, bits of metal, or carved images. These tokens offered protection, or so they hoped. The bond between soldiers was unbreakable. The tent group, 8 men sharing food, tasks, and danger, became the core of a man's life. They trusted one another to stand firm in battle, to guard their backs, and to share what little they had. This bond was stronger than family. In battle, a man fought as much for the friend beside him as for Rome itself. Despite the hardships, pride ran deep. A legionary saw himself as the shield of civilization. His work, his courage, and his endurance kept Rome safe and powerful. Even after death, his service was remembered. Veterans were buried with honors, their tombstones marked with symbols of the legions they had served. Their deeds were carved into stone, a reminder that they had helped build an empire. The Roman army was not only a force of conquest, it was the hand that shaped a world. Wherever its soldiers marched, they left behind the lines of roads, the walls of cities, and the order of Roman law. The life of a soldier was hard, often cruel, but it was the life that built an empire. Chapter 3: The Forge of Discipline. The Roman legion's strength was not only in weapons or numbers, but in its power to endure. The legions outlasted hardship, kept order when others broke, and moved as one body in the face of chaos. Discipline was the iron core of this power, learned through action, not words, and tested on every campaign, in every season, and in every land. A legionary's day began before the sun cleared the horizon. Duty came first, before hunger, before rest, before comfort. Soldiers worked in silence to strengthen fortifications, repair damaged equipment, and secure the camp's defenses. On the march, each man's place was fixed. The column advanced with precision, ready to form battle lines at a moment's notice. The Aquila, the legion's eagle standard, led the way. Its gleam in the light was more than a guide. It was the soul of the legion. To protect it was the highest duty. To lose it was a shame that could darken a legion's name for generations. Standards kept the army's shape on the battlefield. In dust, smoke, or storm, they showed every man where to stand, where to fight, and where to die if need be. Discipline revealed itself in small tasks. A worn boot was mended without waiting for orders. A tool left out of place was returned before it was missed. Water supplies were rationed carefully, even before thirst set in. Roman soldiers understood that victory did not come from courage alone. It came from unbroken attention to duty, from the smallest details to the greatest risks. This attention to order extended beyond the camp. Roads, bridges, and siege works were planned, and built by the same men who wielded swords and shields. The army's might was measured not only in battles won, but in stone laid, timber cut, and rivers crossed. Discipline gave the legions their greatest strength in moments of crisis. During sieges, when disease spread and food ran short, soldiers kept their formations, dug trenches, raised walls, and manned the defences without complaint. No enemy could starve them out unless the gods themselves willed it. When ambushed in forests or trapped in mountain passes, Roman soldiers did not break ranks. They formed shields into protective walls, turned their standards toward safety, and fought their way free when others would have scattered. Discipline gave them not only the will to hold the line, but the skill to survive where others would fall. Retreat, too, was a test of order. A defeated Roman army did not collapse in panic. It withdrew in formation, its standards guarded at all costs, its wounded carried alongside its weapons. Even in defeat, the legions showed their strength, not in the absence of loss, but in their refusal to abandon unity. The discipline of the legion was not kept by fear alone. Punishments were severe. Floggings, fines, or the dreaded decimation, but it was pride that bound the army together. A soldier's honour rested on his place in the line, his service to his comrades, and his loyalty to the cause. This discipline set Rome apart. Where other armies relied on rage or greed, The legions relied on trust, order, and endurance. It was this code that let a Roman army stand firm against larger foes, fight on foreign soil, and build an empire that lasted beyond the lives of its founders. Through discipline, the Roman soldier became more than a warrior. He became part of the machine that shaped the ancient world, a machine powered not by steel alone, but by the strength of men who knew their duty and stood by it, whatever the cost. Chapter 4: The Engine of Conquest. The Roman army's greatness did not rest solely on discipline or courage. Its true power lay in the machinery of conquest, systems of supply, engineering, and organization that turned legions into a force of nature. Rome did not merely send men into battle. It sent an entire structure of war, carefully designed to sustain victory far from home. Every campaign began not with swords drawn, but with plans measured in paces and pounds. Roman generals, assisted by skilled staff, mapped out supply routes in astonishing detail. Grain, water, fodder, and tools were calculated for thousands. Roads were scouted, rivers noted for crossing points, and sources of timber and stone marked for construction. Logistics was Rome's invisible weapon. An army could not fight if it starved or fell ill. Roman soldiers marched, knowing that food and equipment would follow, mile after mile. This engine of conquest was powered by the work of thousands beyond the front lines. Quartermasters organized stores of grain, oil, salt, and dried meat. Blacksmiths mended weapons and shod horses. Engineers plotted river crossings, surveyed campsites, and designed siege equipment. Their work was as vital as any soldier's sword. Without it, the legions would falter. On the march, the Roman column moved like a living organism. Scouts rode ahead, alert for ambush or obstacle. Behind them came the vanguard, then the main body of infantry, then the baggage train, wagons creaking under supplies, spare weapons, and siege gear. Rear guards watched for pursuit. Every part of the column had its place. Disorder meant disaster. Each night the army transformed wilderness into order. Soldiers laid out the camp according to precise measurements. The main streets, the Via Principalis and Via Praetoria, formed the camp's backbone. The commander's tent stood at the centre, flanked by quarters for officers and storage for standards and pay chests. Trenches and ramparts shielded the perimeter, dug and raised by the hands of men who knew that their lives depended on their depth and strength. This was no temporary shelter. Even a single night's camp was a fortress in miniature, a symbol of Rome's mastery over the land. Camps could be built in forests, on mountain slopes, or in hostile territory. The army carried its security with it, and wherever Rome's armies went, its roads followed. Engineers began work even as campaigns unfolded. Temporary causeways bridged marshes, timber spans crossed rivers, and stone roads stretched out to link conquered lands to the capital. Every new mile laid down brought not just movement, but control. Rome conquered with shovels as well as swords. The machine of conquest was not glamorous. It was backbreaking, muddy, and relentless. But it was this engine that allowed Rome to hold what it took. Each soldier was a cog in that machine, proud not only of victories, but of the system that made those victories endure. Roman logistics were a marvel of ancient engineering, designed to sustain armies across vast distances and over many months of campaigning. The lifeline of every legion was its supply chain, a complex web stretching from the granaries of Rome to the front lines. Grain, oil, wine, and salted meat were carefully measured and distributed, with planners calculating precisely how much was needed for each soldier, each animal, and each day. Tools, weapons, spare parts for wagons, and medical supplies were loaded in advance. Failure to account for even small items could mean disaster far from home. Marching with the legions were mule trains, ox-drawn carts, and riverboats where waterways allowed. The Romans mastered the use of rivers such as the Danube and the Rhone, constructing flat-bottomed barges to move heavy goods. On land, vast columns of wagons creaked along stone-paved roads or dusty tracks, protected by armed escorts. Every part of this system worked to one goal, ensuring the army could advance without pause, fed, equipped, and ready for battle at any moment. Rome's engineers were as vital as its soldiers. As the legions moved forward, These skilled men built timber bridges across rivers, cut roads through forests, and raised fortifications around camps. Defensive ditches, ramparts, and palisades were constructed with astonishing speed. A Roman camp was not just a place to sleep. It was a fortress that could spring up in a single day, complete with streets, headquarters, and storage areas. Each camp was laid out with precision, a mirror of Roman order imposed on foreign soil. Supply depots were positioned at intervals along campaign routes, stocked in advance through careful planning. These depots reduced the need to rely on local resources, though Rome often requisitioned goods from conquered lands or bought them when possible. Wherever the legions marched, they left behind not just the memory of battle, but the marks of Roman organization: roads, bridges, fortresses, and settlements that would serve the empire long after the army moved on. Naval support formed part of this mighty engine. Warships and transport vessels carried men and supplies along coastlines and rivers, enabling rapid reinforcement or resupply in distant provinces. The Roman navy protected these convoys from pirates and enemy fleets, ensuring that the lifelines of empire remained secure. Ultimately, the Roman army's success did not rest on courage alone. It rested on this immense, unbroken chain of preparation, construction, and supply, a system that allowed the legions to strike deep into enemy lands and hold what they conquered. It was this machinery of conquest that truly built an empire. Chapter 5: The Edge of Innovation. The Roman army's strength was not forged by steel alone, but by relentless innovation. Every campaign, every battle, and every encounter with new enemies taught the legions to adapt. Roman ingenuity turned challenges into opportunities, creating an engine of conquest that reshaped the world. Weapons and armor evolved with purpose. The short-stabbing sword, the gladius, was refined for close combat, its deadly thrusts designed to pierce between shield walls. The pilum, a heavy javelin, featured a soft iron neck that bent on impact, ensuring it could not be thrown back by the enemy. Even the curved edge of the Roman scutum shield was a product of innovation, ideal for both defense and offense, capable of battering foes in tight formations. But the Romans did not stop at personal arms. Siegecraft became an art. Engineers crafted towering siege engines, from battering rams reinforced with iron to massive ballistae that hurled bolts with terrifying force. On campaign, entire workshops travelled with the legions, forging tools, repairing gear, and constructing machines on site. Their skills ensured that no city wall was beyond reach, no fortress truly secure. Roman roads, those marvels of engineering, were more than highways for trade. They were arteries of war, allowing legions to march swiftly, their boots pounding stones laid with precision. Over 400,000 kilometers, about 250,000 miles, of roads connected Rome's vast territories, turning distant provinces into accessible battlefields. In the field, Roman camps reflected this spirit of innovation. Movable fortifications, trenches that could be dug and defended in a single night, and portable wooden towers gave the army flexibility. The legions became masters of adapting terrain to their advantage, whether fighting on open plains or in dense forests. What set Rome apart was not a single invention, but the determination to refine and improve, to take the best ideas from conquered peoples, enhance them, and make them Roman. From Iberian swords to Greek artillery, Rome's military machine was built on borrowed brilliance, made stronger by Roman hands. Roman innovation did not end with machines of war or roads of stone. It reached into every corner of military life. The legions turned problem-solving into an art form, their ingenuity tested on every front. When faced with flooded valleys, they drained them. When storms washed away bridges, they rebuilt stronger ones within days. When local timber proved scarce, they disassembled unused structures or harvested with ruthless efficiency. Nothing was left to chance. The Roman navy became a powerful extension of this innovative spirit. Shipwrights adapted designs from Carthaginian and Greek vessels, blending speed, durability, and capacity. Warships bristled with corvée boarding bridges, turning sea battles into infantry skirmishes. Roman transports could carry siege engines, horses, and thousands of soldiers across rough waters, and do so reliably. Coastal operations that once seemed impossible became routine. As at the invasion of Britain or the conquest of Dacia, what set Rome apart was the ability to learn. After defeats, they rebuilt. After disasters, they adapted. The siege of Syracuse taught them the dangers of enemy ingenuity and led to new countermeasures in future sieges. In Spain, they refined urban combat tactics. In the East, they studied how to counter cavalry-heavy forces. No enemy's trick was ignored. Rome did not simply borrow ideas. It absorbed them, improved them, and made them part of its arsenal. Supply was innovation's hidden backbone. The army's stores were organized to the smallest detail. Salted meat was packed in barrels marked with weights in kilograms and pounds. Grain was stored in layered pits or sealed granaries to prevent spoilage. Water was drawn from wells or carried in amphorae on muleback. Even fuel for fires was measured and rationed. Every item was tracked. Waste could mean hunger, and hunger could mean defeat. Innovation extended to administration. Ledgers recorded rations, pay, and tool inventories. Engineers kept plans for bridges and siege engines, ready to rebuild or modify as needed. Officers tracked distances marched each day in kilometers and miles, adjusting plans according to terrain and weather. The legions became as much a mobile construction force as a fighting unit, an army that reshaped the land as surely as it conquered it. In this way, Roman innovation was not a matter of chance. It was a philosophy, a belief that through effort and ingenuity, no obstacle was permanent, no enemy unbeatable. It was this tireless drive that helped turn Rome from a city-state beside a river into the master of the known world. Chapter 6. Masters of the Frontier. Rome's empire stretched across continents, from the windswept moors of Britain to the sun-baked deserts of North Africa, from the forests of Germania to the river valleys of the East. Holding these frontiers demanded more than legions and walls. It required a military system designed for constant vigilance, one that could adapt to every landscape, every threat, and every climate. The Roman frontier was not a single wall or line. It was a web of defences, marked by forts, watchtowers, outposts, and supply depots, all linked together like the links of a chain. Each fort, whether built of timber, turf, or stone, was a miniature fortress, garrisoned by soldiers ready to respond to attack at a moment's notice. Some forts held full cohorts, others just a small detachment, but all played their part in the wider defence. These forts were placed with strategic precision. They guarded river crossings, mountain passes, trade routes, and fertile plains. Many stood near rivers for access to water and transport. Others rose on high ground, commanding the surrounding landscape. Forts were positioned within marching distance of one another, usually about 25 to 30 kilometers, 15 to 18 miles, apart, allowing signals and messengers to move swiftly in times of need. Legionary fortresses, like those at Eboracum, modern-day York, Vindobona, modern-day Vienna, or Lambayesis, in modern Algeria, served as regional headquarters. From these bases, patrols set out to monitor the frontier, escort traders, support isolated outposts, or strike at raiders. These fortresses were not merely military bases. They were hubs of Roman life. Inside their walls stood granaries, smithies, workshops, temples, bathhouses, and even amphitheatres. The army brought the city with it to the edge of empire. The frontier was a testing ground for Roman engineering. In Britain, timber and stone forts rose along the length of Hadrian's Wall, stretching over 117 kilometers, 73 miles, from coast to coast. This wall was more than a barrier. It was a statement of power, a platform for patrols, and a base for watching the wild lands beyond. In the east, the Romans fortified river crossings like those along the Euphrates, building bridges and fortresses that controlled vital points. In North Africa, they raised chains of forts, the limes, to monitor caravan routes and defend against desert raiders. But the true genius of the frontier was not just in walls or forts, it was in how the army adapted to each region. Soldiers stationed in Britain learned to navigate boggy ground and dense forest. In the deserts of Syria or North Africa, they drilled in heat, trained to ride, and mastered long-range patrols. Along the Danube, legions built watchtowers and river ports, using boats for both transport and war. The frontier was not static. It shifted, evolved, and responded to Rome's enemies and the lands they defended. The Roman frontier was not just a place of defense. It was where empire met wilderness, where Roman order pushed against the unknown. Here, soldiers were not only fighters, they were builders, farmers, and settlers. Veterans often received land near these frontiers as a reward for service, helping to secure the borders by planting Roman culture in distant lands. These colonies became islands of Roman law, language, and trade in foreign regions. Communication across the frontier was a marvel of organization. Signal towers lined critical points, using fire, smoke, or polished metal to flash messages across vast distances. Couriers rode between forts at speed, carrying orders or intelligence about enemy movements. Along rivers like the Danube or Rhine, military ports allowed for rapid deployment of boats to ferry men and supplies where needed. Every part of this system was designed for quick reaction. No threat was meant to go unnoticed or unanswered. Life on the frontier demanded constant readiness. Soldiers patrolled daily, riding or marching through forests, deserts, or across open plains. They scouted for enemy raiders, guarded traders, and inspected roads and bridges for damage. In harsh regions, they adapted to their gear and tactics. Along desert borders, soldiers added waterskins and cloaks to protect against heat and sand. In cold northern lands, they wore extra layers of wool beneath their armor and built thicker walls for their barracks. The frontiers of Rome were not all alike. In the west, fortresses and walls defined the boundary. In the east, rivers often served as natural limits, guarded by fleets and fortresses along their banks. In North Africa, watchtowers dotted the edge of the desert, their garrisons scanning the horizon for distant riders or dust clouds that signaled danger. The frontier was a living system, always adjusting to geography, climate, and the strength of the enemy beyond. What made the Roman frontier remarkable was not just its strength, but its flexibility. It was a network that could absorb shock, shift as needed, and recover from loss. And it was a symbol. Wherever a Roman fort stood, it proclaimed that Roman law, order, and power had reached that place and would hold it. Chapter 7. Shadows on the Horizon. The Roman army of the late Republic seemed invincible. Its legions stretched across continents, from the windswept hills of Hispania, modern-day Spain, to the deserts of North Africa and the shores of the eastern Mediterranean. But beneath the surface of Rome's triumphs, fractures began to form, fractures that would threaten to undo centuries of conquest. At first, the signs were subtle. Veterans returned to Italy, no longer finding small farms waiting for them. Instead, vast estates owned by the elite latifundia had swallowed up the land. Many of these estates were worked by enslaved people captured during Rome's wars. A legionary who had fought for Rome might come home to poverty, displaced in his own country. This injustice festered, sowing bitterness where there should have been pride. Meanwhile, the demand for new recruits strained the traditional system. The property qualifications that once ensured citizen soldiers had a personal stake in Rome's survival became a barrier. Too few men could meet the standard, and too few wanted to risk everything for a senate that seemed indifferent to their sacrifice. Generals began to take matters into their own hands. They promised land to volunteers regardless of property. They used their personal wealth to equip soldiers, and in return, these men gave their loyalty not to Rome itself, but to their commander. This subtle shift would change everything. The army's unity, once its greatest strength, began to splinter. In distant provinces, these changes played out with deadly consequences. Governors, emboldened by their private armies, defied orders from the Senate. Conflicts that should have been local spiraled into wars of ambition. The enemies of Rome saw opportunity in this growing discord. In places like Numidia, modern-day Algeria, and Pontus, modern-day northern Turkey, Rome's foes prepared to strike while the Republic turned on itself, and behind it all loomed a figure who would come to embody this transformation, a man whose genius for war was matched only by his hunger for power. the name of Gaius Marius was spoken with both admiration and dread. His rise signalled the dawn of a new era, one where Rome's legions would become instruments not only of national defence, but of personal ambition. As dark clouds gathered over the Republic, the question grew ever sharper. Could Rome's mighty army save it from its own divisions, or would it become the tool of its destruction? The power of Rome's military machine was not just in its soldiers or strategy, but also in its mastery of engineering and infrastructure. Behind every campaign was a vast network of roads, bridges, and forts, built with meticulous care and planning. These were the veins through which Rome's strength flowed, enabling rapid movement of troops and supplies across vast distances. Roman engineers were unmatched in their skills. They built roads that could endure centuries, some stretching thousands of kilometers across diverse terrains. These roads weren't mere dirt paths, but carefully layered constructions of stone, gravel, and sand, crowned to allow water drainage. The famous Via Appia, for example, connected Rome to the southern regions of Italy, enabling swift military and commercial travel. The forts and watchtowers that dotted the empire were not just defensive structures, but hubs of communication and control. Soldiers stationed here lived in organized communities, their daily lives tightly regulated by military law and discipline. Each fort was a microcosm of Roman order, with barracks, granaries, workshops, and training grounds. They stood as symbols of Rome's dominance and its ability to impose order far from the city's heart. This system of infrastructure was vital during campaigns. Armies could march quickly, regroup efficiently, and maintain supply lines even in hostile lands. Siege engines, horses, and provisions could be transported with reliability. The logistical feat was staggering, a testament to Roman innovation and administration. Yet, Rome's success was not without its challenges. Harsh winters, rugged mountains, and resistance from local populations tested the army's resilience. Every obstacle demanded adaptation. Engineers devised bridges that could be quickly dismantled or rebuilt, roads that cut through forests, and camps that offered protection from the elements. These efforts paid off. The Roman military was not just an army, but a force that shaped the very landscape of the empire. Their roads paved the way for commerce, communication, and control, leaving a legacy that endured long after the legions marched home. Chapter 8: Discipline and Daily Life. The Roman legions owed their supremacy not only to weapons or numbers, but to an unbreakable system of discipline that shaped every aspect of a soldier's life. Discipline was the invisible steel that bound men into a cohesive, efficient fighting force, a force capable of executing complex maneuvers and enduring the harshest conditions. From the first day of training, recruits were subjected to a rigorous regimen designed to forge physical strength, mental resilience, and absolute obedience. Training camps, or castra, were centers of relentless instruction. Recruits learned to march in step for miles, handle weapons with deadly precision, and construct fortified camps with speed and accuracy. The drills were repetitive and exhausting, but essential. Soldiers had to move as one, act on command without hesitation, and maintain composure in the chaos of battle. Camp life was governed by a strict hierarchy and routine. The castra itself was a marvel of organization, laid out in perfect grid patterns with streets, designated quarters for sentries, and cohorts, storage facilities, workshops, and spaces for training and worship. Each soldier was assigned specific duties: standing guard, maintaining equipment, latrine cleaning, or working in the kitchens. Duty rotations ensured that no man escaped responsibility. Hygiene was taken seriously to prevent disease. Soldiers bathed regularly, swept their tents, and maintained clean water supplies. The army's success often hinged on health as much as on tactics, as outbreaks of illness could cripple a legion far faster than enemy swords. Discipline extended to the harshest punishments. Disobedience or cowardice were met with severe penalties. Fustuarium, beatings with clubs, was common for minor offences. More serious breaches could lead to decimation, the brutal practice of selecting every 10th man in a unit to be executed by his comrades. This punishment instilled fear, but also reinforced the vital importance of unity and reliability. Yet, discipline was balanced by camaraderie. The bonds forged in training and battle created a brotherhood where loyalty ran deep, and soldiers would risk their lives for their comrades. Meals in the camp were simple, but designed to sustain hard work and long marches. The staple was pulse, a porridge made from barley or wheat, supplemented by bread, salted pork or beef, cheese, and occasionally vegetables. Wine, often diluted with water, was rationed daily and served both as refreshment and to maintain morale. The army's logistics ensured that food was supplied regularly, but soldiers were also trained to forage when supply lines were stretched or cut. Rest periods were carefully scheduled, yet the soldier's day was filled with activity: training, maintenance, construction, and preparation. Even leisure was regimented, with time allotted for games, storytelling, or religious observances. This balance hardened soldiers both physically and mentally, readying them to face the unpredictable and brutal reality of war. Discipline in the Roman army did not end when swords were sheathed or shields set down. It permeated every hour, even in moments of rest. The camp was a microcosm of Roman values, a place where order reigned and idleness was seen as a threat to readiness. When soldiers were not drilling or on duty, they worked to maintain the infrastructure that supported their strength. Armor was polished to a gleam, shields inspected for cracks, and sandals repaired to withstand long marches. Weapons were not merely tools of war, but symbols of honor. A dull blade or damaged scabbard reflected poorly on a man's dedication. Building and engineering were part of daily life. Soldiers constructed roads stretching for kilometers, miles, across the empire, bridges spanning rivers, and forts rising in newly conquered lands. These tasks were not punishment or extra labor. They were duties that showcased Roman superiority and secured its rule. The legionary was as much a builder as a warrior, leaving behind the literal foundations of Rome's legacy. Entertainment, too, served the cause of discipline. Board games like La Truncoli, contests of strength, and dice provided controlled outlets for tension. Religious rites reminded soldiers of their place within the cosmic order, and festivals, though modest on campaign, reinforced bonds of community. Everything had a place and a purpose. No activity was left to chance. Justice within the camp was swift and unforgiving. Centurions wielded their vine staffs as both symbols and instruments of authority, delivering blows for infractions on the spot. Yet fairness was prized. A centurion's reputation rested on being respected, not merely feared. Officers who abused their power risked mutiny. Loyalty was a two-way contract. What bound all this together was the pride of the legion. To be a Roman soldier was to belong to an elite, a brotherhood defined by shared hardship, achievement, and sacrifice. It was this sense of duty, sharpened daily through work and ritual, that made Rome's legions the envy and terror of the ancient world. Chapter 9. The Conquest of the Peninsula. The rise of the Roman army was crowned by the unification of the Italian peninsula, a process as brutal as it was transformative. By the 3rd century BCE, Rome's legions had evolved from a local militia into a hardened machine of conquest. Now, they turned their disciplined ranks outward, subduing rival peoples and binding new lands to the growing republic. The campaigns against the Samnites were among the most defining struggles of this era. The Samnites, fierce highland warriors of central Italy, fought with the same determination and valor that the Romans admired in themselves. Their mountain strongholds posed both tactical and logistical challenges. Roman columns learned to navigate treacherous passes, build fortified camps under threat, and coordinate multi-pronged assaults across difficult terrain. These conflicts forced the legions to refine their manipular system, which allowed units to move flexibly and fight effectively on broken ground, a stark contrast to the rigid phalanxes of earlier times. As Rome pushed southward, it encountered the Greek colonies of Magna Graecia, where cities like Tarentum resisted fiercely. Here, the legions faced not only Greek hoplites, but also the war elephants of Pyrrhus of Epirus, one of the most skilled generals of the age. The battles against Pyrrhus tested Roman courage and resilience. Despite suffering heavy losses at Heraclea and Asculum, the legion's unshakable discipline and ability to replace fallen comrades ultimately wore down their foes. Rome's willingness to endure hardship in pursuit of victory became legendary, a trait that would define its military legacy. These campaigns were not mere wars of expansion. Each victory brought new challenges. The Romans did not simply conquer, they integrated. They built colonies, constructed roads, and forged alliances. The famed Via Appia, begun in 312 BCE, was more than a military route. It symbolized Roman resolve to bind Italy together under its rule. Along these roads marched not just soldiers, but Roman law, culture, and influence. The conquest of Italy forged the army itself. Veterans of Samnite mountain battles and Pyrrhic wars became the backbone of future campaigns. Rome's officers, hardened in the fields of Italy, learned lessons they would later apply on distant shores. The wars shaped not only the Republic's borders, but the very soul of its legions. As we follow the final chapters of this campaign, we see how Rome's army was not just a force of destruction, but an engine of unification, and how the conquest of Italy laid the foundation for an empire that would stretch far beyond its shores. Life on the Roman frontier demanded more than skill in battle. It required resilience against isolation, harsh climates, and constant uncertainty. For the soldiers stationed along the empire's vast borders, duty extended beyond war. They became builders, farmers, and sometimes diplomats, maintaining order and asserting Roman power in lands far from the heart of the empire. At Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain, soldiers endured bitter winds and rain as they guarded against raids from tribes beyond the frontier. The wall itself, stretching over 117 kilometers, 73 miles, was a marvel of Roman engineering, with forts, watchtowers, and mile castles providing shelter and defense. Garrisoned units maintained these structures, patrolled the surrounding lands, and engaged in skirmishes with hostile groups. Yet beyond war, these men fostered trade and exchange, bringing Roman goods to distant markets and introducing local produce to the empire. In the deserts of the east, legionaries stationed at fortresses like Dura Europos in modern Syria faced entirely different challenges. Blistering heat and scarce water made survival as difficult as repelling enemy attacks. Soldiers constructed elaborate cistern systems to store water and built thick-walled fortifications to keep the heat at bay. Their presence secured Rome's trade routes to Persia and beyond, ensuring that silks, spices, and other luxuries flowed into imperial cities. The legions on the Rhine and Danube frontiers lived in a state of constant readiness. Here, Roman forts dotted the landscape, often evolving into thriving towns. Civilian communities of merchants, artisans, and families gathered near military camps, creating vibrant border economies. Soldiers who served long enough were sometimes granted land on the frontiers, settling and helping to Romanize these regions. In this way, the empire's edge was both a barrier and a bridge, where Roman culture mingled with local traditions. But life on the frontier could be lonely and brutal. Soldiers might go months without word from home, and supply lines were vulnerable to attack or disruption. Harsh discipline, hard labor, and the ever-present threat of violence weighed on the mind. And yet, the men of Rome's borders stood firm, knowing that their vigilance protected the empire's heartlands from chaos beyond. Chapter 10. Rome at its height. By the 2nd century CE, the Roman army stood as the most formidable military force the ancient world had ever seen. The legions, once a militia of citizen farmers defending a single city, had transformed into a professional institution that projected Roman power from the cold shores of Britannia to the sun-scorched sands of Arabia. At its height, the Roman army was more than an instrument of conquest. It was the backbone of a civilization, a force that sustained the empire's peace, prosperity, and pride. The empire's borders were a marvel of planning and endurance. Stone walls, earthen ramparts, ditches, and outposts marked the edges of Roman dominion. Along these frontiers, tens of thousands of soldiers stood watch, guarding against threats both real and imagined. Each fortress was a self-contained world, with barracks, workshops, armories, hospitals, and baths. The daily life of these soldiers was one of relentless duty. Their discipline, forged in brutal training and battle, was visible in everything they did. Weapons gleamed from constant care. Armor was maintained with meticulous precision, for a single flaw could mean death. But the legions were not simply guardians. They were builders, artisans, and symbols of Rome's might. Soldiers paved roads across mountains and swamps, raised bridges over mighty rivers, and constructed aqueducts that carried fresh water into cities and forts. Camps became towns, towns grew into cities, and with them spread the language, laws, and customs of Rome. Amphitheatres echoed with the roar of crowds. Marketplaces bustled with goods from across the empire, spices from Arabia, furs from Germania, glassware from Egypt. Roman presence turned distant provinces into reflections of the capital itself. The mere sight of the Roman eagle standard, glinting in the sun, was often enough to deter rebellion. Provincial governors and imperial envoys relied on the army not only to fight, but to display the unshakable power of the state. The army was the glue that held the empire together, its loyalty the foundation upon which emperors built their authority. Yet beneath the polished surface of this military machine, strains were growing. Maintaining such an immense force taxed Rome's coffers. Recruitment faltered as fewer Roman citizens stepped forward. Increasingly, the legions filled their ranks with auxiliaries from conquered peoples. Fierce fighters, but ones whose loyalty was not always assured. Corruption crept into supply chains, and distant generals began to see themselves as kings in all but name. The cracks in Rome's armor, once hairline, were widening, and beyond the borders, new threats stirred. Bolder, better organized, and waiting for a moment of weakness. As the Roman army carved its path across continents, it left behind more than ruined cities and conquered lands. It forged a legacy of military brilliance that would echo through history. Roads built by Roman engineers allowed not only legions, but trade and culture to flow, binding distant provinces to the heart of the empire. Fortresses and watchtowers dotted the frontiers, reminders of a power that seemed unshakable. The Roman soldiers' discipline, the tactics of the legions, and the sheer will of the commanders became a model for future empires, inspiring generals and kings from medieval Europe to modern strategists. But beneath this polished legacy lay cracks, barely visible at first. The legions, once a symbol of unity, began to change. Foreign recruits filled the ranks, men loyal not to Rome, but to gold or survival. Commanders sought personal glory rather than the good of the Republic or the Empire. The edges of Rome's world grew restless. In the east and north, new enemies learned from Rome's victories and planned to turn that knowledge against their former conquerors. And then, there was the greatest question of all. How could this mighty force, the machine that had defeated Carthage, subdued Gaul, and held the line at the Rhine, begin to falter? The seeds of decline were sown even as Rome seemed invincible. A storm was coming, one that no formation could hold against, no wall could keep out. As our story ends here, the legions stand on the brink of a new age, an age of uncertainty, betrayal, and unimaginable tests. Who will stand firm when the old order begins to crumble? Who will rise as Rome faces its darkest hour? That, dear listener, is the tale we will uncover in the final part of our series.